Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. In this discussion, I'm joined by Jerry Farmer. Jerry is a retired technology industry executive, having worked for companies like IBM and Compaq, Tektronix, and most recently as the Senior Vice President of North American Resellers for Xerox. He's also one of 3 mentors that graciously agreed to be featured in my book, The Indispensable Leader. So in the book, I talk a great deal about mentors and the importance of having mentors from a variety of different backgrounds and areas of your life, which is why it won't surprise you to hear that in addition to being a veteran technology industry executive and leader, Jerry is also my uncle. As such, I have literally known him my entire life, and he is a mentor I've leaned on throughout my career for advice on things that perhaps maybe you wouldn't want to discuss in your immediate circle, things like career changes or employment contract negotiations. Today, Jerry has agreed to sit down with me for a few minutes to discuss the often unknown power of events and people in the trajectory of your career, as well as the importance of mentors for leaders and those who are aspiring to be leaders. Uncle Jerry, welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Darby. I appreciate the opportunity and look forward to the discussion. It's always interesting.
All right. Well, I believe that people often underestimate the power of past history and interactions with people throughout our lives. Sometimes you don't always realize the impact of a person or an event or a situation that it has on your life or the trajectory of your career until many years later. In our discussions for the book, you talk about an interaction that you had in high school that kind of changed the trajectory of definitely of your career, but of your life probably. So can you talk a little bit about that? Just give folks a preview. They can, of course, buy the book if they want to hear the whole story, but if you would just kind of talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. Be happy to, Darby. It was, I agree with you that throughout your career, you meet people and you interact with people that have a bigger effect on your career than many other factors. And this was one, when I was a kid, I was 13 or 14 years old, kind of going into high school. And at the time, I was like a C+ student. I was not an overachiever. Wasn't at all sure what I wanted to do. And at about the perfect time, we got a new pastor at our church. Remember the guy's name very well. His name was Walter Kierkegaard. He was pretty much fresh out of seminary. He played football in college. He was big and he was gruff. And for some reason, he took a liking to me. And he was my instructor in confirmation. And he pretty much, I would say, played the biggest hand in my life at that point in convincing me that I could do more than what was on my plate at that time. C+ student, small town in Nebraska. You can relate to this. Was I going to work on a farm? Was I going to drive a truck? He convinced me that I could do more. And on top of that, he went on a mission to convince my parents that I could do more and that they ought to invest in sending me to college. His objective was to get me into the seminary to be a pastor, which I didn't end up going down that path. But I did go to college and I did find out that I could do better than C+, and I could, by applying myself, be successful. And I don't know what would have happened to me without that guy. So feel pretty fortunate that he came into my life at the time he did.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those situations that I mentioned, and my guess is, and I'll just ask, was that a situation that at the time you didn't realize the impact it was having? I would guess, but years later you look back and you're like, wow, that really changed things.
Yeah, absolutely. At the time I was, I wasn't particularly interested in much other than hunting and fishing and my friends. But, Yeah, in looking back, and actually our discussions caused me to do quite a bit of reflection on that. And I've even done some work online to see if I can locate Walter Kierkegaard, which I did, and rewarding. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's one of those things you just don't think about at the time, but it had a big impact on me.
So that's a perfect illustration of the importance of history and people in our lives. As you think about mentors, as I said, like I said, we sometimes don't realize the effect until years later, sometimes even after they're out of our orbit, which is what you kind of just explained. So you were part of an industry that really exploded throughout your career. Personal computer market really took off. The internet became part of pretty much most humans' lives. The massive growth in that landscape, and industry leaders around that landscape were constantly shifting. Because of that, you had to navigate numerous challenging people and situations throughout your career. As you look back on that, can you talk about the importance of mentors in helping you and your team members navigate that sort of constant change?
Yeah, that's I think a great question. The one thing that I pretty quickly realized in that industry was you better keep learning. You can't sit still. Everything is changing so fast. And, since I retired, that's even more so true because I have kind of, sat still and I'm out of touch with a lot of stuff now in the market that I used to work to be at up with. But mentors are probably, and the interesting thing about mentors, I think you point this out. You don't know they're mentors at the time, and they may or may not be deliberately going after mentoring you, but even if they aren't, that function is being fulfilled. And so, yeah, I look back, I've got, a handful of people. I could count them probably on not one hand, but a short couple of hands. And they all kind of work to along with the people you work with every day and listening and watching and reading, really kind of help get you where you need to be with what's going on in the market, because nobody can keep up with it. It's just moving too fast.
Yeah, so I think when we talked before, you mentioned that well, you were in some form of sales or sales management for most of your career, and one of the things that you mentioned was that you and your wife joked all the time that you may come home one day and just be fired because it was sales, so you never knew what was going to happen. Did you have individuals who kind of help you deal with that mindset throughout your career?
Yeah, I did. I had, and we did, and Charlene and I always kind of, that was a running joke with us because, kind of semi-serious because you never really did know, as you know. But I had a guy early on in my career that helped me deal with that. And he was actually my manager at the time. This is early on in IBM. And he was probably 15 years older than me and a pretty experienced guy. And I reported to him. And after about working with him for a year and a half, 2 years, I had to sit down with him and I expressed some uncertainty about whether I was in the right place. Am I doing, I studied marketing in college and, am I doing the right thing? And will I be successful at this? And I think really I was kind of fishing for some compliments, I wanted some positive feedback. And his response to me at the time was, only you can answer that. You need to sit down and here are I'm going to tell you the questions. And, he listed down the things that, I ought to be asking myself. And he said, you want a positive response to at least 80% of those if you're going to be successful. And he said, if you don't, then go do something different. If this isn't right for me. And, at the time, it kind of set me back, but I thought about it, and it really kind of does come down to that. You got to take responsibility for answering and knowing whether you're in the right place and doing the right things, and you're working at it. You gotta work at what you're doing. And that was mentoring. And I think he probably had prepared for that discussion. He was probably had it before, maybe. So
Yeah, that actually brings up something else. And I think that in today's day and age, I think that leaders that I've encountered, they often are looking for an easy button. And that's a good example that you were kind of hoping for the easy button. And he was like,
yeah,
no, that's not what I'm here to do.
yeah, yeah, that's absolutely true.
So aside from that situation, you mentioned that you have a number of mentors you could think of over the course of your career. As you look back, what's one particular mentor who helped kind of guide you during part of your career or even throughout your career, maybe even though you didn't realize it at the time?
Yeah, I had, in my mind, I had really three mentors that jump out to me. One was early in my career, and that was the one that we just discussed. But there are two others that really stick out to me as having a major impact on me and what I learned and what I did in my career. One was kind of in the middle of my career, and I developed a relationship with the VP of manufacturing. Excuse me. Hold on a sec. I've got kind of a rough throat today.
No problem.
This was at a business unit that was about $1 billion worldwide. Scope of my responsibility was North American and marketing and sales. And this guy ran manufacturing, and hit it off with this guy. He was a great guy. We sat in meetings together. We'd meet every morning for breakfast. Every morning we would sit down and we'd sit in the cafeteria, and people would come by and talk to us and give us a sense of what's going on. And we'd talk about what we needed to do. And he said to me one day that, I've never had a relationship with anybody in sales and marketing where it wasn't a conflict, where it wasn't, that I need this now, you do this now. And he said, it shows that we can work together. Well, this guy was years and years at Intel, and then later on with the company I was at. And, we over the course of about 5 years of working together, he was definitely a mentor to me, although he wasn't trying to be a mentor. But I learned a lot. I learned a lot about the overall business that allowed me to, develop general manager capabilities that I wouldn't have had before. And that was definitely, a mentorship relationship, even though we were close friends.
Yeah, I think that's an important illustration that is often overlooked. And that is that sometimes when people think of mentors, they think it's somebody over them, either over them in a reporting structure or somebody who is much, much more experienced in their field or something like that. But it's often overlooked that a mentor can be somebody who's a peer. It could be somebody who works underneath you in certain situations, obviously. So I think that that's a great illustration of that.
Yeah.
So I just have a few questions remaining that I'm asking everyone. I started off thinking of, as I went down this path, I should have some quick fire questions because that seems that's the thing to do on like podcasts and that sort of thing. I'm not sure how quick fire these are going to be.
Okay.
But
all right, I'll take them.
We'll go down that path. So the first one is as you think about your career and leading others, what's the most challenging leadership situation that you were in?
Yeah, pretty clear. I think it was because it was pretty dramatic. It was late in my career. At the time, I was reporting to a guy that was president of an operating unit. He had worldwide responsibilities. Mine was North America at the time. Very, very good guy. He was an engineer. I had no background in marketing and sales, which, it was my scope. And so we spent a lot of time together, and we learned a lot of things together. He died actually, and very suddenly.
Oh, wow.
Was a young man. He was probably in his mid-50s, and had a sudden heart attack, fell over and passed away. And very, very sad situation. I knew his family. We went back to New York and attended the funeral, but it threw the business into into disarray. I was with a business unit that had been acquired by a Fortune 50 company, and it took 2 years, but we were just kind of hitting our stride. He was leading that, and all of a sudden, he was gone. And so, and there was no one to backfill. There wasn't anybody available at that point. So the company came and said, we need all of you guys, me being among the management team, to pick up the slack. And so we did for the course of a couple of years. We did a lot of things that we were unaccustomed to. And that was a tough, challenging situation that I really kind of benefited from, having, gotten to know this guy well. But it also made me learn a lot of parts of the business that gave me the kind of the bandwidth to take on more later on in my career. And it was challenging. It wasn't, you had to learn by getting your hands dirty and, getting involved in things that I'd never done before. But it was rewarding at the same time. And, another example, this guy was kind of a mentor for me.
Yeah, so that's a good example of growth mindset versus fixed mindset, because you were forced to have that growth mindset one way or another.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, very true.
So it may be the same situation, but what's the most rewarding leadership situation that you've been in?
Well, it was, but it was for different reasons. It was a different piece of it. As a part of that, I picked up direct responsibility for some things that I had no direct involvement in, and things like service and customer support and customer relationships, and things that that was a totally different science than anything that I'd ever done. And the only way I got to know that was just getting into those business units and getting to know the people, and each of them helping me understand what their business is about, what their metrics are, and how you get those metrics, and how you look at them every day. And even though I was kind of mid to late career, I was learning. I was learning on the fire hose, and that was very, very, very gratifying to me. Just the whole process that people were willing to drop what they were doing and come to me and help me understand these things, and then on top of that, for me to be able to learn them at that stage in my career, I think was a very gratifying thing.
Yeah, so you obviously have a great deal of experience. So I'm going to ask you to think all the way back to the beginning of your career, and think about what's one piece of advice that you would offer to new leaders. And when I say new leaders, I don't necessarily mean young leaders. I mean people who of any age who are just now venturing into leading a group of people, or going to be, or striving towards that. So what's one piece of advice that you would offer?
There's one or two things that I firmly believe that I think everybody, at least in business, ought to practice. But I think you can also practice it in life, in your marriage life and your social life. And there are a couple of principles that I've always followed. One is to listen. Make a practice of listening to people. You look around, I guess it wouldn't be a surprise. I mean, you look around, you see a lot of people that have opinions and want to state those opinions, but are not terribly interested in listening to what other people's opinions are. So my advice to anybody going into a new job or a new situation, or even one you've been in a long time, is to stop and listen, and take time to not only hear what people are saying, but comprehend it, really think about it and consider whether it has an impact on what you're trying to decide and what you're trying to do. But there's another kind of factor to that, is you got to also know when to stop listening, that, you've got a responsibility to act. And there you reach a point, and it's probably different with everybody, of, okay, I kind of know what everybody's at, and we could continue to talk about this, but it's time, we got to do something on this and act, go do it. So listen, know when it's time to stop listening, take responsibility and act would be if you follow those parameters through your career, I really think it will help you be successful in whatever you do.
I think that's great advice on the listening aspect. I have the same philosophy. I always tell people, listen to understand, don't just listen to respond.
Yes.
Sometimes people you can tell they're on the edge of their seat because they want to say what they want to say, but that's all they're thinking about is what they want to say. So they're not hearing what you're saying then.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you so much, Uncle Jerry. I really do appreciate your willingness to talk today, and for all the time you spent with me as I wrote the book. I truly do appreciate your involvement with that. To everybody else, thank you for joining us. Remember, my book, The Indispensable Leader, releases today. You can find it everywhere books are sold online, including Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or on my website at beindispensable.com. So to learn more about what Jerry has to say on a variety of leadership topics, be sure you order The Indispensable Leader today at beindispensable.com. And remember, don't forget to be indispensable.